The boutique was famous in the city, a place where glass walls shined under bright lights and golden frames decorated every corner. People came here not to look but to buy dresses, shoes, and perfumes that cost more than what most people earned in a month. The staff always looked sharp in black uniforms, and the manager, Victor, walked around like a king, holding his clipboard as if it gave him power. He always said the same thing to his team. Smile at the rich, ignore the rest. That morning, everything was busy. Mirrors were polished again and again until they sparkled. Mannequins were adjusted so their gowns fell perfectly. Perfume bottles were arranged like jewels in a display case. Victor walked across the floor, checking every detail. His eyes sharp, his voice cold. No mistakes today. We expect important clients, he said. His staff nodded quickly. None of them wanted to upset him. At noon, the door opened with a small ring of the bell. A woman walked inside. She was not dressed like the others who came here. Her jeans were loose and faded. Her jacket looked old. Her hair was tied back simply. She carried no expensive handbag, no heavy jewelry. Her face had no makeup. She looked ordinary, almost invisible in such a glamorous place. Victor noticed her at once, his lips curled. He leaned toward one of the salesgirls standing near him, his voice low but not too low. Look what the wind dragged in. Thrift store clearance, he said with a small laugh. The girl giggled nervously. She did not really want to laugh, but she knew Victor expected it. The woman walked quietly. She moved slowly between the racks. Her hand reached out to touch a cream-colored gown displayed under the bright spotlight. Her fingers brushed the fabric gently, as if she could feel the story behind the dress. She looked thoughtful, almost lost in her own world. Then she turned and asked politely, "Excuse me, could I try this one in a medium size?" Her voice was soft, warm, and kind. It did not match her simple clothes. Victor stepped forward, his smile fake, his tone sharp. "That gown is very expensive, over $3,000. Perhaps you should look at the sale rack instead." His words carried a mix of warning and insult. The salesgirl froze, not sure how to react. The woman blinked once, surprised, but her voice stayed calm. "I didn't ask about the price. I asked if you had it in medium," she said with steady eyes. She did not raise her tone. She did not show anger, but her words carried quiet strength. Victor smirked, his voice dripping with superiority. "Ma'am, this is a luxury boutique, not a place for window shoppers. We don't have time to waste." He turned to the salesgirl. "Show her the clearance section," he ordered loudly, loud enough for two other customers to turn their heads and look. The woman's face changed slightly. Her cheeks turned red, but not from shame. It was something else, a deeper kind of heat. She stood taller, her eyes calm but strong, her lips pressed into a small line. She looked directly at Victor, then spoke quietly. "That won't be necessary," she said, her words simple but firm. She turned away, her steps steady, and walked out of the boutique without another word. The glass door closed behind her with a soft click. Silence hung for a moment, then Victor chuckled. "Another wannabe," he said proudly. "They think touching a $3,000 dress makes them part of the club." His laughter was sharp, cold. He looked around at his staff, waiting for their approval. Some forced small smiles, others laughed lightly, but a few stayed quiet, their eyes uneasy. Something about that woman did not feel like a wannabe. She had not begged. She had not looked desperate. There had been calmness in her eyes, dignity in her walk, and strength in her voice. One salesgirl whispered to another later. She looked like she could buy this whole place if she wanted. But she did not dare say it aloud where Victor could hear. As the day ended and the boutique closed, Victor was still proud of himself. He felt he had protected his boutique from someone who did not belong. He believed that tomorrow real customers, the ones he valued, would walk in again. He believed he had done the right thing. But Victor was wrong. The woman he mocked was not poor. She was not invisible. She was someone the world knew. She was the wife of one of the most admired men in Hollywood. Keanu Reeves, a man who never bragged about money, a man known for kindness and humility, a man who hated arrogance. The woman carried herself with the same quiet strength he did, and soon the city would know what happened in that boutique. Victor thought he had the last laugh, but his laughter would not last for long. A storm was coming, and it was heading straight toward him. The next day, the boutique opened as usual. The staff stood ready, everything polished and arranged. Victor walked around with his usual proud look. He did not even think about the woman from yesterday. In his mind, she was just another poor visitor who did not belong. To him, it was nothing more than a funny memory, but to the staff it still stayed in their heads. Some whispered about her eyes. about how she left without shouting or begging, about how she carried herself like she was above the insult. Around midday, a car stopped outside the boutique. It was not flashy like the ones Victor loved. It was a simple black car, clean but not screaming of wealth. The door opened and the same woman from yesterday stepped out. Her jacket was the same, her hair tied back the same way. She looked ordinary, but her eyes were calm as ever. When she walked into the boutique, the same soft bell rang above the door. The staff froze. Remembering what happened the day before, Victor spotted her and rolled his eyes. "Not again," he muttered under his breath. Then he straightened his tie and walked forward, his tone cold. "Ma'am, didn't I tell you yesterday? This boutique is not for window shoppers. We are very busy. Please leave unless you plan to buy." His voice was sharp. Cutting through the quiet space, the woman looked at him, her face calm. "I came back because I liked the gown," she said softly. "I asked a simple question yesterday, and you gave me an insult instead of an answer." Her voice was steady. She did not raise it, but it carried power. Some of the staff lowered their heads, embarrassed by the memory. Victor laughed, a cruel, fake laugh. "You liked the gown? That gown is more than your rent for 6 months. I'm not here to play games. We serve serious customers only," he said loudly, making sure other shoppers inside heard it. Some looked at the woman with pity. Some looked away awkwardly. The woman only nodded slowly, her lips pressing together. She did not argue, she did not show anger. Instead, she said softly, "Thank you for reminding me of your standards." Then she turned her head toward the door, as if ready to leave again. Just then, the boutique door opened. Another figure walked inside, tall, dressed simply in black jeans and a jacket. A man with a calm face, dark hair falling slightly over his forehead. His presence filled the room without him trying. The staff gasped softly. A customer whispered in shock. Everyone knew his face. It was Keanu Reeves. Victor's smile froze on his face, his eyes wide. His clipboard nearly slipped from his hand. Keanu walked straight to the woman, his step steady, his eyes warm. He leaned close and spoke quietly. "Sorry I'm late." His voice carried kindness. The woman smiled at him, her face softening. Gasps echoed around the boutique. Whispers rushed like fire. "That's his wife," someone said. "That's Keanu Reeves," another whispered. The staff's hearts raced. They remembered how Victor had mocked her not once but twice. Victor's face turned pale. Sweat touched his forehead. He stammered, "Mr. Reeves, welcome, welcome. What an honor. We are so happy to have you here." He tried to smile, tried to act professional, but his voice shook. Keanu looked at him once, his expression calm but serious. Then he turned back to his wife. "Which gown did you like?" Keanu asked her, his tone soft. The woman pointed gently toward the cream-colored gown under the spotlight. "That one," she said. Keanu nodded, then turned to the nearest salesgirl, his voice polite. "Please bring it in her size, medium." "Thank you." The salesgirl hurried, almost running. She brought the gown with shaking hands. The woman took it quietly and went to the fitting room. The boutique was silent. Only the faint sound of curtains sliding could be heard. Victor stood frozen, his eyes darting nervously. Every second felt heavy. When the woman stepped out in the gown, the boutique seemed to shine brighter. The simple woman in jeans now stood in a dress that made her look like royalty, not because of the fabric but because of the dignity she carried. Keanu's eyes softened, a small smile touched his lips. "You look perfect," he said simply. Victor tried to step closer, forcing a smile. "Mr. Reeves, this gown is one of our finest. Of course it will look wonderful on your wife." His voice stumbled over the word, shame mixing with fear. Keanu looked at him directly now, his eyes calm but unshakable. "My wife asked you a simple question yesterday," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut the silence. "You could have treated her with respect. Instead, you chose arrogance. Is this how you run your store?" His words were not shouted, but they carried weight heavier than shouting ever could. Victor's throat tightened. He could not answer. The staff stared at him, some of them almost relieved to see him finally cornered. The customers in the store watched too, their eyes judging. One evening, unable to sleep, Victor walked past the boutique where it had all begun. The windows still glowed, but the posters were different now. New managers, new faces, he was no longer welcome. He stood outside like an outsider, the very thing he once accused others of being. He watched a group of customers enter, laughing, welcomed warmly by the staff. He felt a sharp ache in his chest. For the first time, he tasted what it was like to be on the other side. Keanu and his wife never mentioned his name. They never attacked him, never demanded punishment, but their silence punished him more, because the world judged him without them lifting a finger. Their quiet dignity destroyed him in ways his own arrogance never saw coming. Inside his small apartment, he began writing in a notebook. At first only angry scribbles, then reflections. He wrote about pride, about arrogance, about respect. He wrote because he could not carry the weight in silence. Page after page filled with his thoughts, his regrets. He did not know if anyone would ever read it, but he wrote anyway. Meanwhile, the woman he had insulted lived quietly, walking hand in hand with her husband, smiling at the world without caring for luxury or fame. She did not need to prove anything. Her worth was already clear, and those who saw her that day never forgot. She became a silent example that true strength needs no loud words. For Victor, every day felt heavier than the last. He once thought losing his job was the worst punishment, but he soon realized the true punishment was living with himself, knowing he had mocked someone who carried more grace and dignity than he could ever understand. He realized too late that the world does not remember arrogance with honor. It remembers kindness with love. And so his story became more than a scandal. It became a warning, whispered in every boutique, written in every comment, repeated in every corner of the internet. Treat people with respect no matter how they look, because you never know who they truly are, and you never know how their dignity might change your life forever. The city soon moved on to new stories. But for Victor, the shame stayed. He could not escape it. Whenever he walked down the street, he felt eyes on him. Sometimes people whispered, sometimes they laughed openly. Once a group of teenagers pointed at him and said, "That's the boutique guy," and they burst into laughter. He lowered his head and hurried away. He had never felt so small in his life. At home, his phone was silent. Once it was always buzzing, filled with messages from clients, bosses, and so-called friends. Now no one called, no one cared. He sat in his apartment, staring at the walls, replaying everything in his head. He thought about the moment she asked politely for a dress, the moment he refused her, the moment she turned and walked away with dignity. He remembered Keanu's words too. They came back every night. Respect is more valuable than fabric. They were simple words, but they burned inside him like fire. He tried to apply for other jobs. He went to smaller boutiques, department stores, even hotels, but each time the answer was the same. They recognized his name. They did not want him. "Your face is too public now," one manager said. "You carry a bad reputation," another said. And so the doors closed again and again. One evening, Victor sat in a cafe, drinking cheap coffee, something he never used to do. He had always gone to expensive places, always ordered the most expensive items to show off. Now he sat in a corner, invisible. He overheard a group of women at the next table. They were talking about the boutique scandal. One of them said, "That woman was so strong. The way she didn't argue, just walked away. I wish I had that strength," another nodded. And Keanu, the way he stood by her, without shouting, without drama, just quiet respect. That's real love. Their words hit Victor harder than insults. He realized that while he was remembered as arrogant, they were remembered as kind and strong. That night, Victor could not sleep. He tossed in bed, his mind racing. For the first time, he began to wonder, what if he had treated her differently? What if he had simply smiled and answered politely? What if he had done his job with respect instead of pride? His life would be normal now. His career safe, his dignity intact, but he chose arrogance. And arrogance had destroyed him. Meanwhile, Keanu and his wife continued their lives quietly. They did not talk about the scandal. They never sought attention. They were seen sometimes in small shops, walking together, holding hands, living simply. People admired them even more. Their silence made them shine brighter. They became a symbol of humility in a world filled with arrogance. For Victor, every sight of them on the news was another knife. He saw the world praising them, celebrating their dignity, while he was left in the shadows, unwanted, forgotten, yet not forgotten, because his shame followed him everywhere. He tried to convince himself he was unlucky, that it was not his fault. But deep inside, he knew the truth. He had made the choice. He had mocked her twice. He had laughed at her twice, and he had done it not because she was rude, not because she deserved it, but because he judged her clothes. Her simple jacket, her lack of makeup, he thought it made her less. But she was more than he could ever imagine. One afternoon, Victor walked past the small boutique where Keanu had later shopped. The window displayed simple dresses, nothing as flashy as the store he once managed, but there were people inside, smiling, laughing, trying on clothes with joy. He stood outside watching, wondering what it felt like to be inside, to feel welcome, to feel respect he knew he could not step in. Not because of money, but because of shame. His old staff had moved on too. Some had found jobs in other places. Some had even spoken about him quietly. One former salesgirl told her new boss, "He was always arrogant. He always judged people by their shoes and handbags." And her boss replied, "Now the world judged him," and both nodded. Victor returned home that evening and sat at his desk. He opened his notebook, the one where he had been writing his thoughts. He wrote slowly, each word heavy. "I ruined myself not by failing in business but by failing in respect." He paused, then wrote again. "She did not shout, she did not fight, yet she defeated me." The words looked strange on the page, but they were true. He realized something deeper too, that power is not in money or status. Real power is in how people remember you. Keanu and his wife would be remembered with admiration, with love, with respect, and he would be remembered with mockery, with shame, with regret. Still, a small part of him wondered if it was too late. If he could ever change, if he could ever rebuild. Not his career, but his character. He looked at the night sky through his window, the city lights shining far away, he whispered to himself. Respect is more valuable than fabric, the same line that destroyed him. Maybe it could also save him if he chose to live differently. And so, Victor sat in the silence. A man who once believed himself great, now humbled by the quiet dignity of a woman he mocked, and the loyalty of the man who loved her. Their lesson had broken him, but maybe, just maybe, it could also teach him how to begin again. Victor's world had shrunk into a small, silent circle. He no longer woke up to messages, no longer dressed in sharp suits to impress clients, no longer held meetings where people nodded to his every word. Instead, his days passed quietly, walking through the city with lowered eyes, sitting alone in cafes, writing in his notebook. The pride that once made him feel taller than others now weighed on him like chains. But the story of that day in the boutique did not fade. People still remembered. Sometimes it appeared again on social media. A short clip, a meme, a quote. Each time the same words stood out. Respect is more valuable than fabric. Those words followed Victor everywhere. He could not escape them in posters and videos, in conversations at nearby tables. He felt as if the world had carved the sentence into his life. At first he hated it. He wanted to shout, to say he didn't know who she was, that it was a mistake. But deep inside he knew it was more than that. It wasn't about not knowing, it was about not caring. He had built his career on judging people by appearance, by shoes, by handbags, by clothes, and that day, his own rules turned against him. One afternoon, Victor walked near the park, his hands in his pockets, the air cool and fresh. He saw families laughing, couples walking, children running. Among them, he noticed a small shop near the corner, a second-hand clothing store. It was simple, nothing like the luxury places he once worked in, but there was warmth in it. People went in and out with smiles. For some reason, Victor stepped inside. The bell rang softly as he entered. The shop smelled of old fabric and lavender. Racks were filled with clothes that once belonged to someone else, now waiting for new owners. The woman at the counter smiled kindly. "Welcome," she said, not looking at his jacket or his shoes, just at his face for the first time in months. Victor felt something strange. He felt human. He walked slowly between the racks, touching the clothes. None of them were worth thousands, but each carried a story, a mark of someone's life. He thought about the boutique he once managed. The gowns behind glass, untouched, worshipped, but cold. Here the clothes felt alive. He stayed longer than he planned. Keanu turned back to his wife. "Do you want it?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Yes," she said. Her voice warm. Keanu nodded. "We'll take it." Then he added with calm firmness, "But never from this boutique." Gasps filled the air. The salesgirl holding the receipt froze. Victor's eyes widened. "Sir, please," he began. But Keanu raised his hand, stopping him. "Respect is more valuable than fabric," Keanu said. "And you failed to give it." He gently guided his wife toward the door, his hand light on her back. Together they left, leaving behind silence heavy with shame. Victor stood like stone, his pride crushed. His laughter from yesterday now echoing like a curse in his head. The staff did not dare look at him. Customers whispered to each other, and outside, the woman who had been mocked twice walked with quiet dignity beside her husband, stronger than ever, while the man who thought himself powerful stood inside his golden palace, already ruined by his own arrogance. The news spread faster than Victor could ever imagine. At first it was only whispers inside the boutique, Staff members told their friends quietly. Customers who had been there told others, and soon the story escaped the walls of the luxury shop. By evening, someone had already posted online a short video clip taken by a customer who had recognized Keanu Reeves and recorded him speaking to Victor. The clip showed Keanu's calm but firm words. "Respect is more valuable than fabric." The line caught fire. People shared it again and again by nightfall. The boutique's name was trending on social media. Strangers from around the world were talking about it. Some praised Keanu for defending his wife with such dignity. Others attacked the boutique for arrogance and snobbery. Comments flooded in. "This is why I never shop at places like that," one said. Another wrote, "Imagine mocking Keanu Reeves' wife." Out of all people, memes started to appear. Pictures of cheap jackets labeled luxury boutique approved. Victor sat in his office late that night, his phone buzzing nonstop. Messages from his bosses, angry emails from headquarters, customers canceling appointments, even threats of boycott. His face grew pale as he scrolled through the endless flood of negative comments. His arrogance had collapsed in just a few hours. The laughter he had once enjoyed now sounded like poison in his head. Meanwhile, Keanu and his wife returned home quietly. They did not post anything. They did not make a public statement. That was never their style. They valued privacy and dignity, but their silence only made the story louder. People admired the way they handled it. The wife's calm dignity, Keanu's quiet defense. It became more powerful than if they had shouted or humiliated Victor in return. The next morning, the boutique opened, but it did not feel the same. The golden light seemed dim. The staff moved nervously. Some customers came only to gawk, whispering and pointing. One said loudly near the perfume counter, "This is the shop that insulted Keanu Reeves' wife." The staff flushed with embarrassment. Victor tried to act as if nothing had happened, but his hands shook as he signed papers. He knew every eye in the room carried silent judgment. By noon, reporters were outside, cameras flashing, microphones raised, asking, "Is it true your manager insulted Keanu Reeves' wife?" Victor tried to avoid them, hiding his face. But one careless comment slipped out. "We treat all customers fairly," he said. But the words sounded hollow. The video proved otherwise. The internet tore him apart even more. Inside the boutique, the staff felt torn. Some were angry at Victor for putting them in this storm. Others were secretly relieved that someone finally stood up to him. He had always been arrogant, always mocking anyone who didn't fit his image of wealth. Now the world saw the truth that evening. Keanu was spotted outside another boutique, a smaller family-owned store, his wife smiling as she carried a simple shopping bag. Reporters asked him about the incident, but he only gave a small, polite smile. "My wife deserves respect. Like everyone else," he said softly. Then he got into his car. The comment was enough to make headlines again. The small boutique he visited was suddenly filled with new customers. People wanted to support the place that treated him and his wife kindly. Victor's bosses finally called him in, their voices cold and sharp. "Do you realize what you've done? Our brand is now mocked everywhere. You embarrassed us, and you insulted someone whose name carries global respect." Victor tried to explain, tried to say he didn't know who she was, but his bosses cut him off. "You should treat every customer with respect, not just the famous ones." He left the office that day with his head heavy. The word termination, written clearly in the letter they handed him. The boutique replaced him within hours. New managers were brought in. The staff breathed easier, but the damage to the store's name would take much longer to heal. The woman, Keanu's wife, never bragged about what happened. She did not give interviews. She did not seek revenge. She lived her life quietly as always. But those who saw her that day remembered her calm strength, how she held her head high while others mocked, how she walked away with dignity. Her silence spoke louder than any angry words ever could. For Victor, life changed forever. Friends avoided him. Strangers recognized him and pointed. Some shouted insults in the street. He lost his job, his reputation, and the respect he thought he had. He once believed power came from wealth and status, but now he understood too late that true power came from humility, from kindness, from the quiet dignity of people like the woman he mocked. The story continued to live on, not just as gossip but as a lesson. People repeated Keanu's words again and again. Respect is more valuable than fabric. It was printed on shirts, shared on posters, used in motivational talks. The sentence outlived the incident, turning into a reminder that everyone, no matter how they look, deserves kindness. And somewhere in the city, while Victor sat alone, Scrolling endlessly through angry comments that never seemed to end, Keanu and his wife enjoyed a quiet evening together, walking hand in hand, smiling at each other, untouched by the storm, proving once again that dignity could never be bought and respect could never be faked. The days after the scandal were heavy for Victor. He once walked through the boutique like a king, giving orders and mocking anyone he thought unworthy. Now he could not even step outside without feeling eyes on him. The news had made him a villain overnight, and the internet never forgave. Customers no longer came to shop. They came to whisper, to point, to laugh. The golden glow of the boutique had turned into a shadow of shame. Victor's bosses gave him no mercy. They told him he was finished. His contract was ended, his name blacklisted in luxury retail. He packed his office in silence, every step echoing with the memory of Keanu's calm words. Respect is more valuable than fabric. Those words haunted him more than the headlines. They replayed in his mind when he closed his eyes at night. His friends turned distant too. Once they enjoyed his stories of dealing with poor customers and laughed at his arrogance. But now they avoided him. They did not want to be connected to his shame. His phone stopped ringing, invitations dried up, and his apartment grew quieter with each passing day. Meanwhile, the story only grew bigger. Talk shows discussed it, newspapers wrote about it, and people admired Keanu even more, not for fame or money, but for humility. The way he defended his wife without anger, without shouting, only with truth, it made the world love him more. They compared his quiet grace with Victor's arrogance. The difference was like night and day. The small boutique Keanu and his wife later visited became famous. Customers lined up outside saying, "If Keanu shops here, it must be worth it." The family who owned it gave interviews, praising his kindness. Their business flourished, while Victor's old store sank under boycott and bad reputation. Victor sat alone most nights, staring at his reflection in the mirror. For the first time, he saw the emptiness behind his proud smile. He had built his life on power, on money, on looking down at others, and in one moment it had all been torn away. Not by anger, not by revenge, but by dignity, the quiet dignity of a woman he thought unworthy. He tried to find work again, applying to other boutiques, but every interview ended the same. "We know your name," they said coldly. "You are the manager who insulted Keanu Reeves' wife." No one wanted to risk their brand with him. No one wanted his stain. At the same time, people online still kept the story alive. They shared images of the woman walking beside Keanu, her head high, her smile gentle. They called her the Queen of Quiet Strength. Many wrote posts saying, "This is how you deal with arrogance, with calm, not with shouting." But Victor's punishment was not only in his career, it was in his heart too. He replayed the moment she looked at him after his insult. The way her eyes did not burn with anger but with disappointment. It pierced deeper than any scream could have. It made him realize what he had become. A man so lost in chasing status that he forgot the simplest rule of life: to treat others with respect. As he was leaving, a young girl entered with her mother. The girl pointed at a simple dress and said, "Mom, this one is perfect." The mother smiled. They laughed together. Victor paused at the door, watching. Something inside him shifted. He realized respect was not about luxury. It was about moments like this, simple and true. That evening, back at his apartment, he opened his notebook and wrote again, his handwriting shaky but stronger than before. "Respect is not about money. It is about how you make people feel." He underlined the words twice, then leaned back, his eyes wet. He had spent his whole life chasing status, but in the end, the thing he lost was the thing he never valued: human dignity. Meanwhile, Keanu and his wife continued their lives quietly, sometimes seen helping small charities, sometimes buying from simple shops. People loved them more each time. Reporters asked again and again about the boutique scandal, but they always stayed silent, never naming Victor, never spreading hate. Their silence was more powerful than anger. It showed grace. The world compared them with Victor again and again. In articles, in comments, in conversations, look at how simple they are. Despite their fame, people said, and look at him, destroyed by his own arrogance. Victor read some of these words when he searched online late at night. They hurt, but they also taught him. One day, while walking through the city, Victor overheard a man talking to his son. The man pointed at a billboard showing Keanu and said, "That's a good man, not because of movies, but because he treats everyone with respect." The boy nodded seriously. "I want to be like him," he said. Victor froze, his heart heavy. He realized that even children were learning from the lesson that had destroyed him. It was then he understood the depth of his fall. He was not only ruined in career, he had become an example of what not to be. His mistake had turned into a lesson for the world, but strangely, instead of anger, he felt something else. He felt the need to change, not to clear his name because that seemed impossible, but to live differently, even quietly. He began to volunteer at small places, sweeping floors at a shelter, carrying boxes at a food drive. No one there cared who he was. They only cared about kindness at first. People looked at him with suspicion, but slowly they accepted him. One man said, "You're not above us here. We all work the same." Victor nodded, feeling a strange relief. He finally felt useful without arrogance. At night he still thought of the boutique, of the gown, of her calm eyes, of Keanu's steady voice. But the memory no longer burned only with shame. It also guided him each time he felt pride rising. He remembered those words. Respect is more valuable than fabric, and they pushed him back to humility. Victor knew he could never erase what he had done. He could never escape being the man who insulted Keanu Reeves' wife. But maybe he could become something else too. Maybe he could be remembered not for luxury or arrogance, but for trying, for changing, for learning the hardest way that respect is not a gift you give only to the rich. It is the one thing every person deserves. Always and so, step by step, he walked a new path. Slower, humbler, but finally real. Victor's new life was not easy, but it was different. He no longer woke up with the weight of pride. Instead, he woke up with the weight of regret and the small hope of becoming better. Every morning, he went to the shelter where he had started volunteering. At first, the people there ignored him. Some even laughed when they recognized him. "Isn't this the boutique manager who mocked that woman?" they whispered. Victor lowered his head and kept working. He carried boxes, swept the floors, cleaned tables, and slowly his silence spoke louder than excuses. The work was simple, but it gave him a strange peace. One day he saw a poor man enter the shelter, his jacket torn, his face tired. The man asked for food softly, almost ashamed. Victor remembered instantly the way he had once looked at people like this, with cold eyes, with judgment, but now he walked over, placed a tray of food in front of the man and said gently, "Please eat. You are welcome here." The man looked at him with surprise, then smiled weakly. "Thank you," he said. That single word warmed Victor's heart in a way money never did. At night, Victor still battled with himself. The world outside had not forgotten. Sometimes he still saw posts mocking him, memes about arrogance, comments filled with laughter at his name. He would sit at his desk, open his notebook, and write, "I cannot change what I did, but I can change what I do now." Those words became his prayer. His anchor, meanwhile, Keanu and his wife lived quietly. They never spoke of the incident. They never mentioned Victor, but sometimes people spotted them in ordinary places, small grocery stores, bookshops, even walking in the park. Always simple, always humble. Their love for each other clear in the way they walked hand in hand. The world admired them more each day. Their silence turned into a symbol. They did not need revenge, because dignity was already their victory. Victor noticed something strange over time. The anger he once felt toward them began to fade. It was replaced with something else, respect. He respected the woman he had mocked for her strength, for her calm. He respected Keanu for his loyalty and his words. Sometimes he whispered them to himself like a mantra. Respect is more valuable than fabric. Each time he said it, it reminded him to stay humble. One evening at the shelter, a young girl came in with her mother. The girl wanted a coat, but she was shy, hiding behind her mother's hand. Victor noticed and walked over. He picked a warm coat from the rack, bent down to her level and said softly, "This will keep you warm." The girl's eyes lit up. She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, Victor smiled too. It was small, but it was real. He started to realize that respect was not a big action. It was small choices repeated again and again, saying kind words instead of cruel ones, listening instead of judging, offering help instead of laughter. Each day at the shelter gave him new chances to practice respect. Each day he felt a little lighter. Still, the shadow of his past never fully left. Once, while he was handing out food, a man recognized him and laughed. "You're the guy from that video, the arrogant manager." The room grew quiet. All eyes turned. Victor swallowed hard, his hands trembling. Then he nodded slowly and said, "Yes, that was me. And I was wrong." Silence hung heavy. But then he placed the plate of food in front of the man and added, "But I'm trying to be better." The man blinked. Surprised by his honesty, he did not laugh again, and slowly the room returned to normal. That night, Victor wrote in his notebook, "Admitting the truth is painful, but hiding it is worse." He realized he could not erase the past, but he could face it. He could own it. He could live in a way that turned his mistake into a lesson. Months passed, and though he remained poor, something in him grew richer. He no longer dreamed of golden boutiques or expensive suits. He dreamed of kindness, of becoming someone who gave instead of someone who took. He dreamed of being remembered, not as the arrogant manager, but as the man who changed. The irony was sharp. The woman he once mocked had never needed to raise her voice to defeat him. She won with silence, with dignity, and she left him with a lesson he could never escape. Every time he saw her photo online, smiling gently beside her husband, he felt the sting of shame, but also the push of inspiration. Victor was still far from perfect, but he was no longer the same man. He walked slower, listened more, judged less. He learned to see people not for their clothes, but for their humanity. And each time he stumbled, he reminded himself of the line that broke him. Respect is more valuable than fabric. It was no longer just a sentence. It had become the foundation of his new life, and so, though the world still saw him as a fallen man, inside he began to see something different. Not the king of luxury boutiques, but a simple man learning to live with humility. A man trying step by step to find redemption in the smallest acts of kindness. Time passed, seasons changed, but the memory of that day in the boutique never left Victor. The world moved on to new scandals, new stories, but his name was still tied to shame. Whenever people searched about luxury arrogance or customer mistreatment, the video of Keanu Reeves defending his wife always appeared. Victor could never escape it. He had become the example of what pride could do. Yet slowly he was learning to live with it. His life was simple now. He no longer wore designer suits or expensive watches. He dressed in plain shirts, old shoes, nothing that shouted power. Every morning he woke up early and walked to the shelter. His routine was not glamorous, but it was steady. He cleaned floors, carried supplies, and greeted people with kindness. Some recognized him, some didn't, but those who did often watched him closely, waiting to see if he would act arrogant again. Instead, they saw a man who bowed his head, who offered food gently, who listened without judgment. One evening, the shelter organized a dinner for homeless families. Victor worked harder than anyone, setting tables, pouring water, carrying trays of food. At one point, a young boy tugged on his sleeve and said softly, "Thank you, mister." Victor looked at the boy's small face. Tired but smiling, his chest tightened. No award, no luxury brand, no wealthy customer had ever made him feel that kind of warmth. In that moment, he realized respect was not only something you gave, it was something you received when you treated others with dignity. Still, he carried guilt like a shadow. He often replayed the scene in his mind. The woman asking politely for a dress, his cruel response, her quiet dignity, Keanu's calm words, the shame that followed. He wished he could go back and undo it. But he knew life never gave second chances like that. What he could do was build a different future. Even if the world never forgave him, he could try to forgive himself. One rainy afternoon, Victor passed by the same boutique he once managed. The windows were filled with new displays, new staff inside, new management. He stood outside, soaked in rain, watching. He remembered how he used to stand inside those same windows, feeling untouchable, powerful. But now he was the outsider, and strangely he felt no anger, only a quiet understanding that this was where his arrogance had led him. He turned away and walked on, leaving the glittering lights behind. Meanwhile, Keanu and his wife continued to inspire people without trying. Their love story was quiet but powerful. They never mentioned Victor, never sought revenge, and that silence made their victory greater. The world admired them not for how they punished someone, but for how they carried themselves with humility. Their dignity turned into a mirror that exposed arrogance everywhere. Victor sometimes read articles about them late at night. He saw photos of them walking hand in hand, smiling simply, and though it hurt, he also felt respect. They had taught him a lesson without even knowing it, a lesson he had once ignored but now lived by every day. Months later, Victor was asked by the shelter leader if he could speak to new volunteers. At first he refused, ashamed of his past, but the leader said, "Your story can teach them something. Don't hide it." So one evening, standing in a small room filled with volunteers, Victor spoke, his voice low but honest. He told them about his life in the boutique, about his pride, about mocking a woman he thought unworthy, about the moment he discovered who she really was, and about how it destroyed his career. He ended by saying, Respect is more valuable than fabric. I learned that too late, but you don't have to. The room was silent. Some nodded slowly, others looked thoughtful, and Victor felt lighter, as if a part of his shame had turned into something useful. He continued his work quietly, never seeking attention, never expecting praise, but little by little, the shelter community began to trust him. They saw the change, they saw his effort, and though the world outside still laughed at his name, inside that small circle he was not mocked anymore, he was accepted. One night, as he closed his notebook after writing, Victor whispered to himself, "I may never be forgiven by the world, but maybe I can forgive myself by living better." He looked out the window at the city lights, remembering the glow of the boutique, the shine of expensive gowns, the false laughter of wealth, and then he remembered the smile of the boy at the shelter, the gratitude in the eyes of the hungry, the quiet respect he felt when he served others, and he realized which glow mattered more. The story of the arrogant boutique manager and the woman he mocked would always remain, but it was no longer just a story of shame. It had become a story of change, of humility, of learning, because sometimes the greatest lessons in life come from the hardest falls, and sometimes losing everything is the only way to understand what really matters. Victor knew he could never erase the past, but he also knew he was no longer the man who once laughed at kindness. He was someone else now, someone still broken but trying, and that effort itself was his redemption. Respect, the very thing he once denied, had become the only fabric left in his life, and finally he understood its true worth.